Simple rhetoric is for simple minds, and the political scene doesn't need any more dumb people in it. The alt-centre are clown world's good guys. They outright reject political fanaticism on account that it ignores the human will to avoid suffering. So they don't fit into boxes neatly enough to be someone else's tools. Well, hello Internet. Here we are back again with That Was the Week That Was, with Vince McLeod from the Alt Centre. Hey Vince, how are you?
Hey Bob, I'm doing well. It's raining here in Nelson. I'm just hoping we're not going to see any more flooding.
Yeah, we've had some amazing flooding. We're going to get to that later. But let us start with the big overseas news, Putin's speech. I have spent a little bit of time in the last 2 days with the speech, recording it, and I'll put the link in the description of this video in case anybody's interested in the English version. Vince, this seems to me to be a guy who is deeply and passionately committed to the well-being of his people, but at the same time, he is a cold and ruthless Tsar. What sense did you get from that speech?
The first thing I noticed from his speech was that his grievances are still mostly the same as they were 1 year ago when the invasion started. The most important thing that I took from it was that Putin hasn't actually achieved almost any of his objectives that he initially had when the war began. He's only taken some 10% of Ukrainian territory. He's nowhere near Kiev. Russia's sustained considerable losses. I've heard 6 figures of men killed in action. So I'm not sure that really he feels like he's finished yet. I think he's entirely ready to fight for at least another year, perhaps another 10 years. He's certainly an old school nationalist in the sense that he's fighting for what he believes to be the power of his nation. But it remains to be seen if the gamble he's taken is going to work out for him and for Russia.
And it is a big gamble, yes.
But it's a big gamble. The main thing that I noticed was that it's still a stalemate. There's no real advances. There's no major advances anymore on either side. So I don't think that Russia can really last that long as this is the case, because they will start losing public support for the war at home. And then the risk of Putin getting overthrown becomes realistic.
Gosh. All right, leaders getting overthrown. Let's jump back to New Zealand. As we mentioned earlier, we've had another round of terrible flooding. And this time we have had a whole lot of looting. And I came across a couple of headlines which showed that Hipkins had initially denied that there had been any looting, and there were comments that this is how Labour rules. They deny these things, and I must say, after reading those couple of paragraphs, my initial positive reaction towards him has been tempered somewhat. So what was that about? Is he being duplicitous?
It seems that the go-to strategy for Labour, whenever they're confronted with bad news, is just to deny that it exists. That seems to be why they have this entire so-called disinformation campaign, where everybody who criticises them is written off as either a disinformation spreader or a conspiracy theorist. If you don't trust the government, if you don't trust that what they say is the truth, then you're a conspiracy theorist now. So I think we're coming into really dangerous times. They'll lie worse and worse and more shamelessly the closer we get to the election. It'll go beyond denying of looting. They'll deny everything now. Chris Hipkins seems to have taken from Jacinda Ardern the cue simply just to deny the premise of everything. I saw a video that was comprised of Jacinda Ardern standing up at question time in Parliament saying that she denies the premise of the question over and over and over again. And then there was another video of Chris Hipkins doing exactly the same thing, just denying the premise of the question. So I think what we're going to see is that's the Labour strategy from now on. It may be the globalist strategy, and if it is, the National will continue doing the same thing when the pendulum swings and they get back into power.
The next thing that happened with regards to the floods was that, well, it's not the next thing, it's the same thing, the looting, the gang violence that there was up there. I was wondering, what do you think was the motivation behind that looting? Was it just gang violence? Or have we got some political dissatisfaction bubbling under? Or is it poverty and natural disaster? I mean, I know that the alt-centre has a very compassionate view towards the lower classes. What would you think was the underlying cause for that eruption of violence?
To my mind, it's a matter of social decay. What we've seen ever since neoliberalism was introduced, and the alternative centre is very critical of neoliberalism, is that community bonds, in all sense, have been weakened or broken.
Mine.
And I think part of the problem with that and the social decay that it's led to is that when you have a natural disaster, you quickly go into every man for himself way of thinking. And people are disinclined to cooperate because they don't feel like they belong to a community. People have been so heavily atomized and individualized and deliberately broken up along so many different lines that they no longer feel like they're part of a cohesive whole. And so they're essentially then competing against everybody else. And so they don't cooperate when it comes to natural disasters like a coherent society, but rather just the lower impulses take over, the animal impulses take over, and they panic and start stealing and looting.
So this is another sign of the end of our cycle.
Yeah, I'd argue that this is another sign that we're into the darkest part of the Kali Yuga, and we are potentially going to see some immense changes of the order of our society very soon.
Well, that leads me on to my next topic, Vince. One of the things that is coming up a lot here in New Zealand with the rains here is people are starting to talk more about climate change. And I found two really interesting and conflicting things this week. One, I will show a little, like a graphic novel of somebody who said he's never bothered about climate change, but now we're having rains, he thinks this is climate change. And there's another one from NIWA showing these things happen once every 100 years or so. So is this climate change, do you think? Or is this just another panicky 2023 overreaction? Should we just settle in and make friends with death?
I think the most important thing to remember is that these extreme weather events are a matter of probability. So you can have a 1 in 100 year cyclone, for example, that'll hit the North Island. But if climate change makes it so that there's more moisture in the air on account of an elevated temperature, that might mean that your 1 in 100 year event becomes a 1 in 40 year event. Or it could be a 1 in 10 year event. It could mean that it happens quite often. We don't really know because the system is so complex we can't really calculate it. But what is known is that it will become more chaotic the hotter it becomes. So for us in New Zealand, it means that we're likely to get more rain in the winter and probably more droughts in the summer. I think we should definitely also make peace with death because that's the inevitable long-term result of climate change. I mean, eventually the sun will swallow the earth. The alt centre believes in taking scientific perspective when possible. So realistically, we have to say that climate change or otherwise, we need to make peace with the fact that our time here is limited, and so we have to act on the right frequency of consciousness.
Okay, we are going to talk about another pair of articles that I came up with. This one is a study about mask wearing, showing that mask wearing is completely ineffective. Is that a word? And
ineffective.
Ineffective. And then there's this one of the Stanford professor, really highly respected member of the research community, falsified results. So honestly, clown world, I would say here again.
Yep, Clown World strikes again. The thing about that research being falsified is that the tradition of falsifying research for political goals goes back a very, very long way, all the way back to at least Franz Boas, who was an anti-hereditarian and therefore wanted to create the impression that there was no difference between races. What he did was falsify the measurements of the cranial capacity of blacks and made the measurements look as if the cranial capacity of blacks was similar to that of whites. In reality, there's actually about a 200 cubic centimetre difference. So he falsified those results to make it look like all races are just the same. And that was a very long time ago. I think there was 110 years ago that this was done. So people have always done this, unfortunately. But I think in Clown World now, when there's so little trust for academia in general, so little trust for academics, I think that people are really having trouble finding where they can get the truth. I think that's something that we can do in this podcast if people understand that we're just trying to tell the truth from an alternative centrist perspective and don't have a particular position to push.
Yes, absolutely, yeah. Well, it is interesting because we used to really believe in science.
I think we can still believe in science. It's just much, much harder to believe in scientists, and especially in the people reporting the science who might not actually have any scientific qualification whatsoever. Journalists get things wrong a lot of the time because there are almost no journalists that are actually qualified to even read a scientific paper, let alone do a meta-analysis and try and get their heads around an entire field of science. So, science reporting, unfortunately, is something probably just that you're better off being really suspicious about.
Oh, well, Vince, we have had a grim week, but it is what it is. That was the week that was.
Yep, it's been a tough week, all right. Cheers, Internet. I hope next one works out better for us all.
Old centrism is more a matter of wisdom than intelligence. As such, it does not attract followers on the basis of education or ideological fashionability.